You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. Wow, we are so thrilled to be here in our 16th year and such a big fan of heritageradionetwork.org that I brought on another really popular host from another show to join us. So, Peter, you're going to introduce yourself and what your show is, because there's so many great hosts on Heritage Radio Network.
Yeah. Hi, Jimmy. I'm Peter Reinhart. I'm host of Pizza Quest. And, our show, well, we usually post new shows every Sunday on HRN. And we talk not just pizza, even though it's called Pizza Quest. We talk about really quest, with pizza being the lead hook. Today, I really want to talk about pizza and beer with you. And I know you're going to come on my show. We're going to talk in a couple of days, and we're going to talk more about hard cider and things like that on Pizza Quest, because I want to find out, when you're on my show, about your journey and your quest. But I guess this is my turn to be your guest, and I'm excited.
Great. Well, let's get a little backdrop on you. I mean, you're an acclaimed author, pizza expert. You teach at a culinary school. Let's go way back. 30 years ago, Peter Reinhart. How'd you get to here?
Yeah, right. We'll give you the 30-second, 30-year tour. Listen, I've been teaching at Johnson & Wales University for nearly 30 years. Between there and other culinary schools, I've been teaching professionally for 30 years. And along the way, writing books about my area of expertise, which is primarily bread. I'm a bread author, and pizza is a subset of bread, so to speak, since it's, half of the pizza is the bread part of it. And so after I ran out of things to say about bread, I started writing books about pizza and found out that this is a huge category. And so along the way, I've done about 13 books while I'm teaching students at Johnson & Wales University on the craft of bread making. And a lot of that has to do with understanding fermentation and all the components that make it probably, the most important and beloved food stuff in the world, whether it's used by itself as a standalone bread or as a component of something like pizza. And the thing is, we take it for granted. And so probably about the same time that I got into teaching, the Bread Bakers Guild of America came into existence in the early 1990s to teach American bread makers the art and craft of bread making as known by European master bakers. And we started absorbing all that knowledge until our bread community caught up to theirs. And we started holding our own in the international competitions and everything else. And we saw the same thing happening, a kind of a parallel journey happening in the pizza world. So I started writing about that, because who doesn't love pizza? But I certainly love it. And I have a love affair that goes back to my childhood with very strong food memories, taste memories related to pizza. And I started writing about, essentially the theme of it is what is the difference between good pizza and great pizza? Since I think there's only really two kinds of pizza, good and great. There's no bad pizza.
I know a bunch of good pizza makers. I know when Jim Leahy made his no need recipe that was popular. Yeah. I love his flatbreads. I met a couple other guys. I met the author of The Pizza Diet, who's got a restaurant in New York I think it's called Rialto. And it may not be Rialto, but he said that he could lose weight by eating pizza because there's so much air and water in it.
Ah, interesting.
Is there any truth to that?
Well, I'd like to see him and see how much weight he actually has lost. I'd like to, I need to lose some myself. I think, what it really comes down to when it comes to losing weight is calories in and calories out, and so you could lose weight on any kind of eating plan if you control the amount that you eat. My problem is I love food so much that sometimes I take unnecessary second portions, because if I find a pizza or anything else that I'm really enjoying, I have a hard time not eating it and stop eating it when I'm full. And so I'm trying to learn the signals internally that tell me, okay, if you wait just 5 more minutes, you're not going to be hungry. But if you eat right now, you're going to eat 2 or 3 extra slices that you don't really need. Anyway, as far as the healthiness of pizza, well, as long as you don't have any sensitivities to gluten, and so many people do, but not everybody, it's a good complete food. It's almost like the perfect food, pizza, because it's got protein, it's got vegetable, it's got starch, it's got a complete, balance in the makeup of it, and it tastes delicious. There's something magical that happens when you take good dough and put something good on top of it, because really, what is pizza but dough with something on it? And when you put those two things together, you get something that's even greater than the sum of its parts.
You're making me hungry. That sounds good.
Good.
Well, back to this pizza diet. Now, the idea was, so I'm going to ask you about a scratch pizza dough recipe that's good for beginners. But this one chef swore by the fact that you had to have a 3-day rise on your pizza dough.
Uh-huh.
And you'd walk into his restaurant, in the corner, he had this giant, it was like this pile of dough that it just kind of kept rising and rising. And they would cut off a piece and make your pizza for you.
Really?
And I loved it.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
I never really knew if that was all just marketing.
It sounds a lot like marketing. I've never seen anybody just cut off a piece of dough and turn it instantly into a pizza, because usually you have to, your dough has to rest a little bit so that you can stretch it out. But if they have a system or technique that works for them, then, fine. The thing that you point out, though, about the 3-day fermentation, I think that's one of the emerging trends in pizzas, understanding that what makes the difference between a good dough and a great dough is proper fermentation. What you're really doing is transforming a piece of bread dough from just flour, water, salt, and yeast into something that tastes delicious. And that's because you transform the starches and the proteins and the sugars that are in that flour. They're transformed through fermentation into something that allows them to, well, we always say that to our students, the baker's skill is you have to evoke the full potential of flavor trapped in the grain. And you evoke that flavor through fermentation, and the key to fermentation is understanding time and temperature. So that's the game right there, is understanding that. And one thing that pizza makers intuitively have known, even before they were trained more recently, as the bread knowledge started to seep over into the pizza world, is that if you make the dough a day ahead, it's going to be a better pizza than if you make the dough the same day that you try to make the pizza. And then along the way, more and more recently, a lot of pizza guys said, well, if 1 day is good, what about 2 days? What about 3 days? There's a wonderful Roman-style pizza guy named Massimiliano Saiva who likes to ferment his doughs for 4 days and 5 days. And so a lot of people started adopting those things without always understanding the reason, the science behind it. But that science is starting to creep in there because of some really good food writers. And they're finding that something can happen and does happen as you let the dough ferment for a longer period of time, one of which is the dough gets more relaxed. So if this guy who's doing the pizza diet has a pile of dough on the counter, and that dough has been fermenting for anywhere from 2 to 5 days, it's going to be very relaxed. So if he slices off a piece of that dough, it might be pretty easy to stretch it out into a pizza. Normally, if you make a pizza dough and form it into a dough ball, you have to let it rest for a couple of hours before you can actually stretch it out, because the gluten tightens up. But if the dough is fermented for 2 or 3 days, or even 4 days, the gluten is already very relaxed, and so it's easier to stretch. So these are the little nuances, and yet, as we always say in the business world, your product is only 10% of your business. Marketing is 90% of your business. So if they got a great marketing plan to sell the idea of his long fermentation approach to pizza, then good for him. In the end, it's, you can make the best pizza in the world, but if nobody buys it, then what good have you done? So you got to be able to make it and sell it. And fermentation, again, is the key to all of that.
Okay, so the scratch pizza dough recipe. Let's say we're going to talk about the industry and how you can buy frozen dough and all this stuff. But let's say I want to open a sharp little cafe. What would be a good pizza to start with if I wanted to make my own pizza dough?
Are you asking me what would be a good pizza dough to start with, or a pizza in general?
Either. I mean, let's say my real interest was running a cafe. I had coffee. I had good wine, but I wanted to keep it simple.
Right.
I wanted to have pizza from scratch dough.
Well, I think that we see everywhere that, when people open pizza places, sometimes with very inventive toppings and creative and clever concepts of pizza, in the end, their customers usually, after they may have tried some of these fancy ones, they go back to sauce and cheese. Really good tomato sauce, really good cheese, sauce and cheese pizza, whether it's a margarita pizza or just what we call sauce and cheese, mutz and sauce. It's kind of like the vanilla ice cream of pizzas. I love chocolate ice cream, and I love some of the clever flavors that you can get everywhere. But vanilla ice cream always outsells all the other flavors, and the sauce and cheese pizza always outsells all the other pizzas. And also, and I'll use my wife as an example of this. When we go into a new place, well, we'll say as a pizza place, when we go in, she always wants to try their margarita pizza first before she tries anything else, because she says, if they can't make a good margarita pizza, then I'm not going to trust them with any other creative or clever pizza that they want to throw at me, because it all comes down to, can you do it with the sauce and cheese pizza? And that's true with like when we go to a Mexican restaurant, first thing we taste is the salsa, because if we don't love the salsa, then we're going to be doubtful whether the rest of the menu is going to be that good. So there's certain things that are sort of the benchmarks of any cuisine, and I think with pizza, it's a red sauce and cheese. You may, eventually fall in love with their white pizza or their pancetta pizza or this or that. But if you're going to have a pizza cafe, make sure you can deliver a really good pizza with a crispy crust, a very good pizza sauce, which, there's a lot of good options out there with tomato products, and there's lots of brands that are excellent. And then there's about 3 to 5 mozzarella cheese brands that can give you a little bit of an edge or a difference, and don't always go for the best price, go for the best flavor. But if you can do that, then the sky's the limit. You can build variations off of that and build your following.
Which of your books should I read first if I'm interested in making good pizza?
Well, of my pizza books, I have 3 pizza books, and the first one I wrote about 20 years ago, and it's called American Pie: My Search for the Perfect Pizza. And it's half the book is recipes, and the other half are the stories of me traveling all over the world looking for that difference. What can I learn from the great pizza places, and I call them destination pizzerias, that differentiate them, that elevate them above the 98% of pizzerias that are good. They were 2% back then, maybe 1% of pizzerias that I would call great. And by great, I mean memorable, places that you can't get out of your head. You can't wait to go back to. There's something about it that just, that you become obsessed about. And what are they doing? Using the same ingredients as everybody else. They're all doing sauce and cheese. Why is theirs better? What are they doing? So that book was really about trying to find out those difference makers that elevated them to that next level. Now, that book came out over 20 years ago, and since then, the pizza community has evolved. And a lot of the people who were doing good pizzas back then have learned through the classes that are taught by the great pizza makers and by bread makers coming into the pizza world, explaining to them about fermentation. They've learned how to elevate their pizza. Because I would say the bottom line rule of making great pizza is you have to have a great crust. You can have the best toppings in the world, but if you have just an average crust, you're just going to have an average pizza. But if you have a great crust, you can put just oil and salt and pepper on it, and it's going to be a great pizza, because it really begins with the crust. Some people say 80 to 90% of the pizza experience happens in the crust, and then everything else is just sort of takes it the rest of the way home. So you got to master the crust, and then get quality ingredients, and then learn the craft. The most famous pizza maker in America today, at least the most successful pizza maker, is a guy named Tony Gemignani out of San Francisco, and he's opening slice houses all over the country, but he's based in San Francisco, and on every one of his boxes, if you buy a pizza, to go in the box, he prints the phrase, "Respect the craft." And so he's done a lot to elevate the notion of pizza as a craft and not just as a business idea or as a fast way to make a buck. The other guy that's sort of helped to elevate the pizza in America is a guy named Chris Bianco, who many of your listeners probably know of. Pizzeria Bianco, about 25 years ago, burst on the national scene out of Phoenix, Arizona. He's got a few new places now, like in LA and other cities, but mostly it happened in Phoenix, Arizona, not a pizza mecca. But he was a New York kid who transplanted to Phoenix, and he decided to make great pizza there. And he figured out how to make a crust that would just knock your socks off. And so some of the best writers in America, Ed Levine and some of the other food writers of that period of time would write about him, saying the best pizza in America is not in New York, but it's in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, he raised the benchmark. Other people followed him. And now, instead of there just being, let's say, 1% or 2% of the pizzerias being great, there are dozens and dozens, maybe it's 20% of the pizzerias are doing great work. And I'm only using great work as a way to differentiate between the everyday pizza that we're used to, because even everyday pizza can be a wonderful experience. You don't go wrong with pizza. It's either good or it's great. And so the what I'll call college pizzerias, the ones that you see on campuses, the ones that are around the corner, in a place like New York City that you see on every street corner, they're putting out really good pizza. Is it destination pizza? Maybe not necessarily, but if you're looking for a slice of pizza, you don't care. I'll take any pizza is better than no pizza, right? But then if you're on the hunt, like I basically called my search for the perfect pizza my quest, and a couple of people read the book and they were in the film business, and they called me and they said, we'd like to turn this into a TV series. This is a really cool thing because we're kind of foodies and we're questing for food all the time. So that's how we started the site pizzaquest.com, which started out as a we did a pilot for PBS, and then the banking crisis hit and we couldn't fund the whole series. So we turned it into a web series, and people can watch some of the early videos that we did at pizzaquest.com. And then since the pandemic, we've turned it into a podcast. So you're doing, what did you say, 20 years of beer sessions? Are you 16 years? We've only been doing our Pizza Quest podcast for about 4 years since the pandemic, but that kind of opened up and we weren't able to go on the road anymore with a camera crew. And so we just started doing me interviewing other people who are on fire with something that drives them, a fire in their belly, whether it's about pizza or about anything else in life. And that's what I want to get out, is finding out what is it that drives them, the same way that I wanted to find out what differentiated a good pizza from a great pizza.
You're like the greatest hype guy ever. You're amazing.
Well, because we're excited about it.
Listen, you mentioned pizza in Phoenix. So is the myth of New York, is water the best water for pizza, bagels, and beer, New York City? Is that a myth? Because of Chris's, it went from New York to Phoenix, Arizona. He's making great pizza.
Yeah.
Did he ever say, "Oh, the water's not the same"?
Yeah. Well, I think that Chris would fall. I can't speak for him, but I would say he probably falls on the camp of saying it's not the water that makes great pizza. New York City does have great water, and as a result, you can make a really good pizza and really good bagels. Whether you're trained, whether you've been in the craft for your whole life, the raw ingredients are there, and water is the main ingredient in pizza dough. It's other than flour. Flour is the 100% ingredient, and the water is about a 65% of the flour weight, and then there's a little salt and a little yeast, and you got pizza dough. So New York City water does make good pizza dough, but you can make great bagels and you can make great pizza anywhere where you can get decent water, as long as the water's not like heavily chlorinated with or tainted in any way. You can make great product, because the real flavor magic happens during the fermentation. It's just like beer makers. Would you say, as a beer expert, would you say that Rocky Mountain water is the difference? Because remember, Coors built the whole marketing plan around the fact that they were using Rocky Mountain water, right, from Colorado. Is it the water really that makes the beer good, or is it somebody who knows how to ferment liquid grain, grain cooked in liquid, and evoke the full potential of flavor trapped in that grain in a bubbly, refreshing beverage? I think it's more the latter. Water is important, but it's not the thing that makes the difference in the end.
That's a good point. Thank you. That's something that we've talked about over the years, and I go more with the grain myself.
Yeah.
I like to go deep, and that's one thing we've learned in the last few years, is a lot more about craft malt and people growing and processing that.
Yes.
As well as brewers that are working with it. I will say one thing about beer, just we're talking water and grains and stuff. I like when someone's working with the water, the grain, and other things that are local to them.
Yeah.
And they're making a product that reflects that. And rather than trying to make the New York style pizza in, Florida or something else.
Well, I think that, some people got really carried away and they started importing water from New York, I knew one place in New York City that was bringing water over from Naples. And I'm going, what a waste of money and effort, and then you lose that, like you said, the connection to your local ingredients is a very important part of elevating your product. So I think that the connection between the person who's making the product, we'll call him the pizzaiolo, who's making the pizza, and his or her ingredients is an important component, because if you feel connected to your ingredients and you have a love for those ingredients, that love does transfer into the finished product, because it transfers as caring, and you want your customers to know that you care about them enough to make a great product for them. And so I think with beer making, beer is, to a bread maker, beer is liquid bread. And I would think to a beer maker, bread is just solid beer. The processes are very similar. It's fermented grain, and the goal is the same: to evoke the full potential of flavor that's trapped in those ingredients. And the thing about beer making, in my understanding, and one of the reasons why I became a bread maker and not a beer maker, although I know a lot of people who are doing both because they're so similar, is that it's fussier. Beer, to make great beer, is much fussier than to make great bread, because you have to be more precise. And when I started out, I just knew how to throw ingredients together, and I had a flavor palette that, worked, but I didn't know the science. But I found that it was much easier for me to make a good loaf of bread than to guarantee that I could make a great batch of beer from batch to batch to batch. Same thing with winemakers as well. And cheese, I started out actually as a cheese maker before I was a bread maker. And I moved away from it because you needed to be much more precise in your honoring time and temperature, because 1 degree off in making, beer or cheese could throw the whole batch totally off kilter. With bread making, there's a lot more forgiveness, a lot more tolerance for human error. And that's partly because there's more grain. So the grain buffers a lot of the mistakes that you might make in miscalculating time and temperature. And in the end, if you open a bakery and try to make a living, then you try to create consistency by controlling the things you can control, like the temperature of the bakery, the temperature of the proofing or the fermentation process, the temperature you bake at. All those things are critical. But in the end, bottom line for me was bread gave me a lot more margin for error to be able to still put out a great product.
Going way back again, so you started as a baker. Why did you start as a baker? What were you baking? Where did you work? It's always great to hear how someone started.
Sure. Well, my wife and I were living out in Sonoma County, California, right in the heart of, one of America's great food and beverage epicenters, right in the middle of the great wine country of Sonoma County. And we were both involved in Christian ministry. And one of the things we did as a ministry was, we lived in a community with other people, and we all knew how to cook. We could cook for each other. And we said, hey, if we want to support ourselves and the work that we're doing, maybe we could do it through food. And so my wife was a really good cook. She was the head cook at a retreat center that we operated. I had been a cook for many years. I cooked in group homes for juvenile delinquents, and I cooked in seminaries, and so I knew how to cook. And so we put together our repertoire, and we opened a small cafe in the town of Forestville, California, which is on the Russian River in Sonoma County. And we knew that there were certain things that we could build that restaurant menu around, one of which was I had stumbled into bread making over the previous few years and learned that I had a natural aptitude for it. So we knew we were going to make homemade bread. And that was sort of the key, was having homemade bread that was really good, that was different and better than you could buy at the store. And then all the other things that we knew how to make. I built, my side of the menu was gumbos and chilies and barbecues and spicy things. And my wife's side of the menu was soups, really good salad dressings, and chocolate desserts. She was really good at chocolate. So we had enough breadth of menu to create a small cafe, and we opened. And little by little, people found us. The whole idea of opening the cafe was not only to provide a livelihood for ourselves, but to create jobs for the local high school kids who, after school, they all needed money. And so we ended up, mentoring a few dozen kids over the years that we ran the restaurant to give them some job skills. And that was the service that we were providing to the local town and community. So from that, we kept going, and we didn't know which of the things that we were making would really strike fire, but the breads did. The breads developed a following of their own that allowed us to then expand our operation, because our restaurant was so small that we couldn't make a living at it. It was just sort of like a laboratory for creating fun and good food. But we leveraged that into a bakery, and we went from making like 20 loaves a day for the restaurant, and then for a while we were making like 40 loaves because another restaurant wanted to use our breads. And then we said, let's take it, much broader and sell it to other restaurants and to the public. And so we opened a bakery that started, like I said, 20 loaves a day, went up to 40, then 100 loaves a day. And before long, we were doing 200 loaves a day. And eventually we got it up to 2,000 loaves a day. And we grew it up to 2,000 loaves a day over about 3-year period. And we moved to a larger facility for that, separated it from the restaurant. And the breads just took on a life of their own. And that's when I realized I had something to write about, because I was always envisioned myself as a writer more than almost anything else, that I did. I didn't self-identify as a cook, but I did identify as a writer, and my hope was to eventually, write some books that helped to convey my worldview to other people. But I didn't know what I wanted to write about. But when I started making bread, the metaphor of what bread is kind of came alive for me. And so my first book, the name of our bakery was called Brother Juniper's Bakery. And so the name of my first book was Brother Juniper's Bread Book, Slow Rise as Method and Metaphor. And so this principle of slow rise fermentation, which I really had no clue about the science behind it. I just knew that if I let my breads rise more slowly and maybe sometimes gave them an extra rise, the breads turned out better than if I tried to make them fast. And that was the driving force for the first book, was built around that little conceit or metaphor of slow rise being a better way to live life. And that's led to 13 other books since.
That's great. Well, actually, some of my favorite brewers, especially if they're making lagers, will also talk about time, time in the tank.
Yeah.
And it's a rare breed that can do that, because, again, it's taking up time in the tanks. I'm sure it's the same as when you're making bread.
Yeah, because if you think of time as just an ingredient and not just an abstract thing, but time is a critical ingredient, as is temperature. Those are two critical ingredients once you get past, the solid ingredients, the water, the flour, the grain, whatever. But time is so essential, and not everybody gets that at first, or they don't realize, the difference that time can make. And then, as you just said, some places may not have the capacity or the physical space to be able to wait as long as it takes to get the best possible outcome.
Yeah, some of them think it's tying up real estate, but yeah. I'm glad you mentioned it. I think the slow rise in time is pretty key. I know you wanted to talk about trends. You mentioned the 3-day rise. What are some of the other trends going on? I mean, we could talk about frozen doughs. Let's talk about that. I'm always in the context of opening up a place like a cafe, a wine bar. That's always how I think.
Yeah.
And then we know we've got a lot of industry listeners. When I have years ago, a friend of mine was putting together a place, and I don't want to say too much about it because it's still going on, but the point was to have pizza at a bar. And he did a quick study, and he found, I didn't realize, I'd never thought of it, because I used to, let's just say I thought you had to make your own dough. And suddenly he found all these places where it seemed like almost nothing. For next to nothing, you could buy pre-made frozen balls of dough.
Right.
And you could make a quick pie, like a bar kind of pie.
It's
I just didn't even know those things existed, because I never really worked with real food service companies.
Well, you can get them from food service companies, but you can also get them if you're a home cook, let's just say, and you want to make pizza. You can go to a place like Trader Joe's or even to your local supermarket, and they often will sell in the refrigeration section pizza dough balls that have been delivered every couple of days. They get a delivery, because if you keep them cold, just as we were saying before, sometimes those extra days in the refrigerator, you're getting a dough that has definitely had longer fermentation than one that was just made, from the Betty Crocker cookbook that you made at home. And so it's already going to be a pretty decent dough, as long as it didn't get exposed to warmer temperatures and start to ferment, and then get, it kind of uses up its flavor. It can over ferment. Most of the time it's not like that. Now, in the food service side, there are some good and there are some bad pizza doughs, because they add additives to allow, since they, at a big production place, they'll make thousands of dough balls that need to be preserved in a freezer section for like up to 6 months. So they have to put anti-crystallization ingredients in there and this and that. And so they mess with it a lot. It's not a pure mixture of ingredients, because it's necessary to protect it from, from long freezing. And so it does change it. Does it make good pizza? It still makes decent pizza because it's just dough, but it may not be destination pizza. But I think that, again, as the technology has evolved and the knowledge of how this technology works, there are a lot of places that are making very good pre-made pizza dough. They ball it up into the size, like a 16-ounce dough ball or whatever, and then they flash freeze them. And when they flash freeze them, that kind of stops the fermentation. And so they give it a fermentation first, then they flash freeze it. And then when you get it, all you have to do is slowly thaw it in the refrigerator. You do it slowly in the refrigerator so it doesn't wake up and start to ferment again. You want it to just be malleable. And then when you turn it into a pizza dough, it's already had the fermentation in it. That's a growing category. And I think that bar pizzas are becoming, in terms of trends, bar pizzas have been around for a long time, but it was pretty much, a New Jersey, New York kind of thing. Chicago had their own kind of bar pizzas, thin crusted pizzas. California even had like the Shakey's Pizza Hut or Shakey's Pizza Parlor pizzas, bar pizzas, tavern pizzas. Those are all very similar. They kind of faded out of popularity, but then about 3 years ago, they came back with a rush. And now people are in love with bar pizzas because you don't need special pizza equipment to make them. You can make them in the oven behind the bar at your local tavern. So we're seeing a resurgence in that style of pizza. And that's just one of dozens of different types of pizza that different regions will popularize.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting edge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Just about the frozen dough. In New York, there's a green market, farm market system. And there's one farm up in the Hudson Valley called Hawthorne Valley. And years ago, they started having their own frozen pizza doughs in balls. But the makeup of the grains, it was local grains in the flour from where they were. And my wife and I used to swear that was the best pizza we had.
Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, like you said, we were talking about earlier, there's something about being connected to your ingredients. And I think it's always good to support local growers, local millers, local farmers, and because you feel connected to, you even know the people that did the work and grew it and brought it to you. That connection that you feel passes on to the consumer at the end. And for the most part, it's fresher. The ingredients are going to be fresher. They're going to have more potential flavor built into them. And you know that if it's, small farming, that the care and love that went into it is probably going to be the quality of the soil might be better. And in the end, as every winemaker knows, it's all about the terroir. It's the better the soil, the better the grapes and the better the wine. So those are all real things. The problem is that just having those real things is not enough to make a great pizza. You have to have those things, plus you have to have the skill and the craft to be able to turn those things into a great product. And but that's all learnable. We have workshops all the time. There's a couple of terrific pizza schools for home cooks in New York City and in other cities that teach people. I know 50,000 people have gone through the pizza school in New York City that have learned how to make great pizza by doing the things that we're talking about today.
Is that Mark Bello?
That's right, Mark Bello. Yeah, have you had
Mark
Mark on the show?
Street.
Yeah.
I haven't, but I knew him when he was just starting out. He won one of my food competitions about 15 years ago. Maybe it was a Castellane cook-off or a chili cook-off or something.
You should get Mark on the show. Mark and his wife Jenny have a terrific pizza school. It's called I think it's just called the Pizza School or something like that. New York. There's a couple pizza schools. I think theirs is called Pizza School in New York City or New York. And he can talk about the same things that we're talking about, but he can tell you from the standpoint of how they teach people, how to make great pizza, destination quality pizza out of their home ovens.
Yeah, no, I've been to his store and he's got a set up like home ovens all over the place. And have you been to the store?
I've not been to the store.
Yeah, I haven't been there in a few years, but I will definitely check them out.
I used to get up to New York City, like every year. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I'm coming to you from. And I used to come up all the time, but lately, I haven't been traveling as much. And so I keep promising people I'm going to come and see them. I promised Mark and Jenny that I would come to the school, but we haven't made it happen yet. And it's going to happen sooner or later.
Pizza School, NYC, great place. There's so many trends. I mean, I know you mentioned it. So you mentioned bar pizza. You mentioned people taking classes for home pizza making. What are a couple other trends you want to talk about? Because I know you're out there. You're an expert. You're a consultant. You're always at all the big pizza expos.
Yeah. Well, that is the Pizza Expo itself, which happens usually in March in Las Vegas, draws 10,000 people a day, some of whom are in the business and some of whom are just consumers, just, fanatically curious about what's going on in the pizza world. And that's the best place to go to spot trends. Like about 5 years ago, I went and I was a judge for one of the pizza competitions there, and we saw these square pizzas coming through, not Sicilian style, but they were more in what they call Detroit style. And so now everyone knows Detroit style now, but back then, only people from Detroit knew about Detroit style pizza. And these Detroit style pizzas really made an impression on the judges and the competitions. And we said, this could very well be the next big thing. So the next year, when we came back to the expo a year later, it already was the next big thing, and it was happening around the country. And some of the people who fell in love with it from Detroit were opening their own places in places like Denver and around the country, everywhere. Some people just wanted to be able to get it, and now they're popping up. They're everywhere. New York City, I think Emmy Squared is one that opened in Brooklyn, and I think maybe in the city, but that's one example of a place that's kind of jumped on that square pizza concept. And basically they're baked in metal pans. They're similar to a Sicilian style pizza, but they're not quite as thick, and they've got really creative, inventive toppings. Once again, in the end, the most popular topping is sauce and cheese, but the cheese is different on a Detroit style pizza. If you get it in Detroit, they use a kind of cheese called brick cheese, which is made in Wisconsin. It's not imported Italian cheese. And they use it because that's what they had. 60 years ago when this kind of was developed by a guy who had a bar and just wanted to make pizza, and he had these metal pans that he took with him when he had worked at in the auto industry. He took the blue steel pans that were used to hold nuts and bolts, and he took about 60 of them when he took his retirement from there, and he took them with him to his bar and started using them, and that became sort of the thing. And by baking them in these metal pans, you get this very crisp, almost like hot buttered toast undercrust on your pizza that is part of the distinguishing characteristic that makes it so great. You get the crunch factor on that style of pizza. So it's almost like eating hot buttered toast with sauce and cheese. So the cheese pizza would be, sometimes they would actually just bake it with the cheese, and when it comes out of the oven, they would drizzle streaks of fresh pizza sauce over the top, kind of like they look like streaks of like a tire when it peels out in the driveway and it leaves, tread marks, in the driveway, because it's Detroit. So they called it the Motor City Special, So the idea is this is a tribute to, Detroit as the Motor City. But that was a kind of a good an eye opener to realize that you don't have to bake the sauce on a pizza. That by putting it on fresh at the end and just letting it get hot, on top of the hot pizza, you have a totally different experience of the tomato side of the pizza than you do when you bake the pizza with the sauce, under the cheese. So those little things like that can be game changers, or they move the dial a little bit. So that's one particular style. And we mentioned earlier Roman style, which has not exploded the way I thought it might, mainly because it's harder to make, I think, than almost any other style of pizza. It takes some real skill and practice, but when it's executed well, and if any of your listeners go make it to a pizza show, and they have them in New York, but the big one's in Vegas, look for the Roman pizza booth. Massimilio Saiva is there making these pizzas, and they'll blow your mind. They'll change totally the way you think about pizza.
They're like long pies that are kind of like stretchy. Is that what like Jim
they're baked
Leahy
in a
does?
pan? Well, there's different kinds of Roman pizza, but his way is he bakes them in a long rectangular pan. It's not as thick as a Sicilian or Detroit, but it's very airy. His dough, typically a pizza dough has about 66% water to flour. His pizza dough has about 85 to 90% water to flour. The dough is almost like molten lava when he works with it. And over the course of 4 days and 5 days of fermentation, every day he folds the dough a little bit. Each day it gets a little firmer and a little stronger. And by the time he bakes it, it's still got all that water in it, but you can handle it. And when he bakes it, then it really opens up. As the gas escapes from the water, kind of creates steam, and that steam is a gas that pushes the dough up. It opens up, and you get these big hole structures inside the dough, and the top and the bottom are crisp and have a nice snap, and the inside is very creamy and buttery. And then sometimes he puts toppings on when it goes in the oven, but a lot of his pizzas, he tops them when they come out of the oven. He puts all these beautiful fresh, greens and meats and this and that on them. And then they cut them in squares, and they cut them with this giant pair of scissors instead of a knife. And so when you go to a Roman pizza place, you buy it by the piece, not by the pie. And they may have 6 or 8 different kinds of pizzas on display, and you can get one of each, or get as many as you want of these. And it's not like what we call Neapolitan pizza, which is the pizza from Naples that was sauce and cheese with the thin crust, and that later became the New York style pizza, which is different now from Neapolitan. They're all inspired by Naples, but the Roman style pizza, they say, is inspired by the pizzas that are happening in Rome, which is a different style than Naples. And then there's Northern Italian pizza like focaccia and schiacciata, which comes from Tuscany. Focaccia comes from Genoa and the Ligurian region of Italy. And each of these regions have their own version of dough with something on it. And they may not call it pizza. They may call it focaccia. But it's the same idea. It's dough with something on it. It's their version of a pizza. It's hard to find a destination level focaccia out there, but they're coming. There's more of them, because once people know how to make them and learn the difference between restaurant focaccia, like you would get at an Olive Garden, which is just fast focaccia. It's just bread, as opposed to true crafted focaccia, which puts it at the level of some of the great pizzas of the world. You come along, you can be won over to that style when you have a really good version of it. So we're going to see probably over the next few years more and more appearances of great focaccia. Schiacciata is the same idea, but it comes from Tuscany, and so they have a different name for it, but it's a similar idea. Sometimes it's got 2 layers, a bottom layer and a filling, and then a top layer. I mean, there's so many ways to do pizza that you can be on a lifelong quest and never really get to the bottom of it.
That's a great intro. I will say, you got me with Genoa, because that's where my father's family's from. And I did grow up. They're from a little place called Recco, and I did grow up with things like the focaccia. But it was basically the focaccia. It was just like olive oil and thin slices of onion on top. And then the onion and olive oil would merge. They'd merge and become sweet, and they would melt into the dough. So the good piece would have had a melted piece of olive oil onion in it. It wouldn't crisp up or anything.
Well, that the town of Recco, where you're referring to, is famous for what they call the focaccia col formaggio di Recco. Focaccia col formaggio with cheese di Recco, from Recco. And people make pilgrimages to Recco. There's only a few places in town there that actually make it. I did that. I went there. I write about it in American Pie, going there and having it for the first time. And it's a very thin bottom crust. It's like a sheet of phyllo dough. It's so thin, or strudel dough. It's like a strudel pizza, thin bottom crust. They put dollops of a very fresh, creamy cheese in the center, a little olive oil, salt and pepper, then another layer of this very thin crust over this dough, like phyllo. They poke holes in it so it doesn't balloon up, drizzle it with olive oil, salt and pepper, and bake it. And then they cut it in these squares, and you just can't stop eating it. It is so good. Nancy Silverton is bringing this to America through some of her restaurants in L.A., and now she's doing, I think she's doing one in New York now, or no, she just opened in Washington, D.C., Osteria Mozza, which is in the restaurant concept Nancy pioneered in L.A. She's bringing focaccia col formaggio di Recco to her restaurants because, like me, she thinks it's one of the hidden gems of the culinary world. So look for it, and if you could get a chance to try a piece, go for it, because it really is. I wouldn't say, it's hard to overuse the word like life-changing, but there's certain things that you eat where the bells start ringing and the lights go off and you go, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't ever had this before. And it's so simple and so good that you're going to want to have it again and again. That's what I mean about destination, or, great versus good.
No, I'm sold on it. I got to try it. Here's another one from my grandmother, who was from Abruzzo in Italy, in the mountains.
Yeah.
She always made, it was kind of like bread with cheese and pizza on top. It would be just a kind of a rectangle pan, but she didn't really make pizza. She just made like a bread dough and stretched it out, and it just always had it was a lot of sauce on top.
She may not have called it pizza because that term is really associated more with Naples, but it was the same idea as dough with something on it. That nowadays, I think the term for that style of pizza is grandma pizza, and so maybe they named it after her.
You're right. But there's another one. Okay, so I was at a pizza place in New England. A guy was aspiring to be up there with the best pizzas, and he's still learning. But what was interesting is he was really proud of his dessert. I'm going to ask you about, what do you do with leftover pizza dough? Well, he had fried dough. They made fried dough for dessert, and they drizzled it with honey. But he said that's what he does with his leftover pizza dough. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, I have. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like frying tortillas and making chalupas and things like that, But even some pizza places. There's one in New York City that's famous for making fried pizza dough, where they take the Neapolitan dough and they deep fry it, so it kind of puffs up and it's like frying a tortilla. And then when it comes out, then they put the sauce and cheese on it and throw it back in the oven to finish it off. So fried dough is great, but to turn it into a dessert, it's almost like it's a no-brainer. You go, why? Why does more people do this? Because you can't beat fried dough. just ask Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme. Fried dough is always a hit. It's not health food, but it's really tasty. And then to drizzle it with some powdered sugar or some kind of a syrup at the end, or put a little pot of honey on the table and let people dip it in the honey. Great way to finish the meal.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks for sharing all your trends and insight. I know you're an expert. I mean, I love that you started with baking, and I know you've done a lot on that and teaching. I know you wanted to mention the parallel between pizza dough fermentation and beer fermentation. And I'm going to give a shout out to a beer. So what I'm drinking right now, I like, as you may know, I drink a lot. I like wines, I like ciders, I like all kinds of beer. This winter, I'm loving porters again, just kind of a classic style. But I like it because when you talk about a liquid bread, I think about things like Doppelbocks, but I think about a porter because it's not heavier, but it's got I mean, how do you describe a beer where you can taste like the grain and the fermented grain?
Right.
And that's a different taste than this fizzy IPA.
Yes.
And sometimes it's the best thing to have with a meal. One good order. This one's from Lamplighter Brewing. It's called Werewolves of Cambridge. It's in Cambridge, Mass. Good friends of mine.
Well, Jimmy, I got a question for you. What is the difference between a porter and a stout?
Oh, those are good questions. I'm not usually the expert. I usually ask other people that.
You're like me.
So,
you get
yeah.
you get the other people to answer the questions. Well, the reason I'm asking you this is because I just made a bread today. In fact, it's sitting in my kitchen. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm very excited about it. I call it my Irish stout bread, but I was describing it to a friend of mine who's a kind of a home beer maker, and he said, "Oh, that sounds like more like a porter." And what I do is I use in the bread dough itself, I add chocolate malt, so basically barley malt that has been sprouted and roasted and until it looks like dark coffee beans, and then I grind it into a powder and put that into the bread dough. And it makes the dough dark, and it gives it this toasty, malty flavor that this bread tastes the way a porter or a stout beer also tastes. So it's like solid beer, I think. I think I.
Yeah, I mean, you know that it's the magic of the malt, and again, if it's good grains and it's malted right, you get a lot of flavor, and usually the same way you use just a little bit in your pizza dough.
Yeah,
there's still base malts. And that color, that flavor comes from a very small amount of those specialty malts. So I don't know, like to me, it's always the maker. Porter, stout, you wouldn't believe it, but I mean, I think most people think that the stout might be stronger and more bitter. Well, it's not true, because even if you're going by a Guinness, the Irish stout, dry stout, could be 3.5% alcohol. And a porter also doesn't have to be like these super strong beers, but they are. But the ones I like, could be 5-6%. Just enough to give you a little relaxing buzz and fills you up at the same time. There are people that make their living off of, same as you're expert on pizza. There are people that taste and judge, and people build their businesses around these awards. I personally I think everyone makes beer differently, and I like that. So I like this one, Lamplighter Werewolves, the porter, and it's perfect with pizza and a simple meal. And I can only drink one of it though, because it's just that it's perfectly satisfying.
Yeah,
it's
that
that
kind
of
it.
beer.
Well, you got me. Now you got me hungry. I feel like my wife is waiting for me to take her out for dinner. I think I'm going to be looking for a place where I can get a porter and maybe a Lamplighter porter if I can find it.
Yeah, well, you might not, because that's the other thing. It's hyper local. It's my quest, honestly, to be, whether it's beer or cider. Every time I'm in a new region, there's always someone that knocks my socks off, and it's the kind of thing where I have that beer and I have to go back and have it again and again. So some of the old time, the really good operators of beer bars and pubs, they call it, a lot of them are Irish. They'll say it's the Moorish quality. You always want more. And even I remember Garrett Oliver, these are, was for a long time the big
from
New York
Brooklyn,
City,
Brooklyn brewer.
Yeah, beer maker. He would say, the goal is we want the beer we make, we want people to have 4 of, because but that tells, and I knew that from, if you want to know, like when my last restaurant was basically a beer bar restaurant, craft beer bar. But when the wave of, I was right at a front row seat to the, explosion of craft breweries in New York City in 2014. And I remember I'm not going to say the names, because there were some breweries I knew that on certain lines I would move 2 kegs a week, no matter what. Mm-hmm. Certain breweries would come in, and that beer would go through the 2 a week, and as expected. Other breweries that opened, we wouldn't even move 1 keg a week. Sometimes that keg took 3 weeks, and that was just that means it didn't have the Moorish quality, and a lot of times, a lot of times the difference between a simple pizza, maybe it's the same thing, pizza versus beer. But for me, there's a lot of beers I can't even drink the full pint, and there's a lot of reasons. But then there's beers that I can drink 4 of and keep wanting to come back.
Well, Jimmy, what you're describing is so much like parallels, my journey, what I call my search for the perfect pizza, your search for, for the Moorish beer, so to speak. I want you to talk about that. I know you're going to be coming on Pizza Quest, and I'd love to spend our time together hearing about this search that you've been on. I love this idea. In fact, this could be a great title for if you ever write a book. The Moorish principle. I love it.
Well, I'll work with you on it. But I'll tell you what, listener, this is exciting. Peter and I, it's kind of like a 2-part series. We're doing an episode on Beer Sessions Radio, and then I'll also be on Pizza Quest. So 2 Heritage Radio Network shows. We got a lot more to talk about. So
we scratched the surface today, and we'll dive deeper on the next round.
I'll say this: the minute Peter brought Pizza Quest to HRN, 5 years ago, it's the only thing I heard about. And just talking to him, this guy's an amazing, knowledgeable, but a great radio talker and host. So I'm just, man, privileged to have you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. When you're excited about something, it's easy to talk about it.
That's great. And I love pizza too. So, hey, Peter, thank you. Anything else you want to say before I give credits?
No, I just thank you again for having me on, and ask your listeners to follow us over to Pizza Quest and look for the episode where Jimmy Carboni is our guest, and that'll be coming up very soon. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into hard ciders, as well as hearing more about your journey, in search of the beer that gives you the Moorish.
All right, thank you, Peter. And again, big thanks to Gabe, our head engineer. Thanks so much for working with us, and big shout out, become a member and support heritageradionetwork.org. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.